Herzlich willkommen bei Digitale Optimisten. Ich bin Alex und ich stelle dir in diesem Podcast die Ideen der nächsten Generation an Gründern aus dem Silicon Valley vor. Heute melde ich mich etwas tagesaktueller, denn wie wahrscheinlich alle von euch bin ich auch von den Ausgangs- und Kontaktsperren betroffen, die das Coronavirus mit sich gebracht hat. Ich bin aber einer der Glücklichen, denn ich kann meine Arbeit noch sehr gut aus dem Homeoffice machen und ich habe keine schulpflichtigen Kinder. Viel schwieriger ist das Ganze natürlich für alle, die auf einmal den Schulunterricht für ihre Kinder ersetzen müssen. Die ganze Situation führt jetzt dazu, dass neue, digitalere Unterrichtsformen plötzlich Hochkonjunktur haben, die vor ein paar Monaten noch undenkbar waren. Mit meinem heutigen Gesprächspartner Kelly Smith rede ich genau darüber. Er sagt, dass unser schulisches Bildungssystem sich seit 1850 in der Hauptsache kaum verändert hat. 30 mehr oder weniger interessierte Schüler sitzen in einem Raum, gucken nach vorne und kriegen das Wissen von einem Lehrer übermittelt. Deshalb hat er Prenda gegründet. Prenda ist ein vom Y Combinator finanziertes Startup, das sogenannte Microschools überall in den USA aufbaut. Was Prenda genau macht, welches pädagogische Konzept er verfolgt, was ihn überhaupt dazu befähigt, die Verantwortung für die Bildung von tausenden Kindern zu übernehmen und wie er die Methoden des Silicon Valley auf das Schulwesen überträgt, das alles erfährst du in dieser Folge. Am Ende der Folge spreche ich wie immer über die 3 Sachen, die ich aus diesem Gespräch für mich gelernt habe. Mehr Infos findest du auf digitaleoptimisten.de/podcast/Kelly. Wenn dir der Podcast gefällt, dann gib mir unbedingt 5 Sterne auf Apple Podcasts, damit mehr Menschen diese Gründergeschichten entdecken. Und jetzt viel Spaß mit Kelly Smith von Prenda. Great. So, Kelly, thank you for coming to my podcast. I am extremely thrilled to have you on. I came across your startup when I was looking at the Y Combinator list for 2019, and I saw Prenda into education. So I'm really thrilled to have you.
Thanks for having me, Alex. It's great to be here.
Maybe you can tell us a bit about yourself. What are you all about? What was your path before you became an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think you could go all the way back to education for me. Like, it's so much of this is wrapped up in one. First of all, I was that kid that was starting businesses at age 5 and 7 and tinkering with, ingredients in my kitchen, thinking I was going to make it big with. Just give you a little tip: peanut butter and syrup go well together on pancakes and waffles, and so I thought I will blend those two and make a commercially viable product. Turns out when they cool off, it all just settles back into this really disgusting mess. And so I gave up.
The MVP failed.
The MVP at age 5 failed. So, but I did other things. I sold baseball cards to my friends, and that was so young entrepreneur. Did well in school. Basically, I bought into school, right? And I was one of those people who, kind of saw it as a series of hoops to be jumped through. It was a game that I was good at. I enjoyed winning. I didn't necessarily. It didn't occur to me to learn or think of myself as a learner. It was just do the minimum amount of work to get good grades. I ended up second in my class in high school with all A's and a never above a 91%. So I I was proud of this, that I had done the minimum amount of effort to get the grades that I wanted to get. And then later, when I got to grad school at MIT, found that if you actually spent your time really learning things, as many of my classmates at that phase had done, you could actually know a lot of stuff instead of what I kind of had, which was a pretty patchy foundation. And I had to really work hard to try to keep up at that phase. But anyway, that's kind of an academic story. I ended up working on nuclear fusion. I thought this will be cool to save the planet through free, abundant energy made from seawater. As you probably know, that doesn't work. So that was a little bit of a setback. And I knew I wanted to be involved in things that mattered in my career, while I was alive. And that led me to, a variety of jobs in technology, software. I did product and marketing. I've always straddled sort of both, the technical and the human side of things. And I just love solving problems. So at one point, I'm jumping right into Prenda here, if that's okay. I built a software company, sold it to a small VC-backed firm. And while I was working for them remotely from my hometown in Arizona, I just decided to start teaching kids computer programming at the public library. So this was my sort of accidental stumble into education. I was realizing that all the materials to learn how to code were on the internet for free. And I was going through with my son, who was 8 at the time, like how to learn how to code. And he was into it. And I thought we might as well do this at the public library and invite all the kids for free and make a thing where, make a poster that says, come learn how to make a video game. And that was sort of the beginning of my like experimentation, if you will, in the education world. Is that a decent sketch to get us to at least this point?
Yeah, that is. Well, that is quite a path, right? From nuclear energy, if I got that right, to teaching kids.
Yeah.
So now you're the founder of Prenda, right? Maybe you can explain a bit, what is the problem that you're solving with Prenda?
Yeah, I mean, this sounds cliche because I think to your listeners and to many people, it's so obviously true. But we're looking at an education system, a K-12 school system that is the technological equivalent of railroads and telegraphs, right? Like around the same time, 1850, 60, is sort of the early days of Horace Mann goes to Prussia and comes back to Massachusetts and puts in this state-sponsored education, and just to be super clear, like a really great innovation. It opened up open doors in America for lots and lots of people to be able to receive education. That was never possible before. You had only the wealthy that could hire a kind of a tutor to come teach their kids. So this was an amazing thing, but unfortunately, we haven't changed much since then. And I think people that are looking around at, telegraphs are obviously obsolete. Railroads still exist, but most people fly, right? So there's these new technologies that we've solved to move ourselves around and communicate, but the classroom still feels more or less the same. And of course, I have educator friends that are grimacing right now because there's a lot of innovation. There's things that people are doing, but by and large, systemically, we're still looking at that factory model of education, and parents know it. There's been this, if you see the data on this, it's just this slow and steady movement away from your local neighborhood school. Here in Arizona, where I am, 20% of kids attend a charter. So it's very common for people to shop, right? To look around and decide, hey, I want this school over that school. Anyway, so that's the problem. I think the specifics of it are really interesting, actually, when you start talking to one family versus another. So one family might say, my kid understands the material and wants to go faster, and it's frustrating for her to have to listen to more things that she already knows. And if you ask the teacher in the parent-teacher conference, the teacher may assign additional worksheets on things she already knows as opposed to opening up new paths. That's one sub-problem, I guess, of the main problem. But equally likely is somebody says, my kid doesn't read well, and they're in 5th grade, and it's like there's this pressure to read well, and it's just it's become this major psychological roadblock for them. They feel like a failure. There's pressure built in our system that really works well for the very middle of the distribution, and it doesn't do well on either side. And then I think there's lots of other ways that education can be improved just by thinking hard about the human at the middle of it, which is these kids that are, I think too often forgotten in the conversation.
I find the idea, and I want to underscore that idea that I find really interesting, is how everything has changed around us. The way we communicate, the way we travel, even the way that we, shop, right, has fundamentally changed. But the way that we teach our kids is fundamentally the same across the world, right? We have, let's say, 30 kids in a room looking up front and having someone talk to them about history, math, and everything else. And I think that is a fascinating starting point to base your idea off of. And let me maybe understand two things. The first thing is, so the form of education might have been the same, but also the contents of education have logically have changed a bit, I would say. So how does maybe you can walk us through what you do, what Prenda is, and maybe also how you tackle both the form of how teaching is done and the contents of what you teach?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think I'm going to flip it, because I think what we're trying to do with a child is the main thing. And we've really tried to build everything around that. And the form and our concept of what we call micro schools, and using people that are not trained educators and doing it in informal spaces, and some of the things that may look crazy about Prenda, all really flows from a really strong commitment um, to a real simple concept, basically, of learners. We, a lot of people go through this exercise and come up with these mission statements that have semicolons and multiple clauses, and it's like hard to follow the grammar of a mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
Prenda, we got the team together and we said, you guys, we need a mission statement. And I was like, let's do it in as few words as possible. We did a 2-word mission statement. So our mission statement is 2 words, and I will say it to you now. So get ready,
Okay.
Empower learners. And people will listen to that and they'll say, oh, that's trite. That's, of course, everybody's doing that. But if you look closely, like, that's not actually what schools are trying to do. It's like trying to get test scores, and we're trying to get, like, even people that are more cutting edge. It's like, well, we want the whole child, and we want social and emotional, we want STEM and all these different things. It's like, but wait, at the core of all of this is a human being. And I would posit, and I kind of stumbled to this point through some experience I had helping kids learn how to code, but I would posit that if a child decides that they don't want to learn, it's almost impossible, if not all the way impossible, to really get learning. Like, you can get them to do a worksheet, you can use compulsory mechanisms to get that, and you can get them to take the test, and you can get them to maybe improve their score on a test. But like real learning, the kind that's going to actually help them in their life, if they don't choose it, it's impossible. So that's a radical statement if you think about it. And we embrace that. We say that's an observation about human nature. On the flip side of that, once somebody decides they want to be a learner, there's this compounding multiplier that is crazy powerful. Like, I don't think anybody appreciates how insane it is. I mean, the people that would appreciate it is somebody who's watched. I was just reading about the Fortnite World Championship that's happening in New York here in a little bit. There's the contestants are 12, 13, 14-year-old boys. And if you look at these kids, it's like they've gotten really good at a very specialized thing. And of course, it's just like pushing buttons in a video game, but it's like, if you think about the cognitive function and all the things that they do fully voluntarily because they just like love to play the game and they want to win at this game, it's a contrast, right? Like, imagine if you put that kind of mental effort into learning algebra or something. It's a total world changer. The problem is agency, right? Is most people don't make that decision, and I would argue that systematically, our education system doesn't invite them to, right? It doesn't even consider that as a factor. It's like, we're going to do this to you, education, and we're not going to give you that. So I'm sounding very like preachy and philosophical, but it's important to like understand where we're coming from. And when we say empower learners, I'm serious, right? Like, I want you to see yourself as a learner, and I want you to have that confidence that you can go out and learn anything you want, which may include Fortnite, but it also may include, nonlinear multivariable calculus, and it may include, fixing pipes underneath people's houses. There's like lots of different things you can do with that. Once you are a learner, I feel like you have the power to succeed in your life. And so that's a real like long-term metric that I have no idea, how we're even going to track it, but that's the kind of thing that we're trying to accomplish. So if you start there, then it's like, okay, well, what should learning look like if that's what we're trying to do? And obviously, it's going to involve giving a lot of autonomy to the kids, like letting them not only learn it on their own, but struggle through it. Like, our kids, I joke that the kids in Prenda schools cry a lot, like probably more on a on a per capita basis. Like, there's more tears, and it's, for me, it's all good and healthy, right? They're pushing up against the frontier. So you don't have kids like me that are like, this is a joke, I'm just going to do the minimum and skate through. And you don't have kids that are like, I disengage, I quit because I can't do it. I mean, basically, you want to put everybody to that frontier, and you want to surround them with an environment, because these are humans after all. They need to be surrounded by, the right environment for learning. And for me, that means other kids that are similar in age, working alongside and a lot of interaction with those kids, and a caring adult that's just like completely committed to helping each student be the best they can. And so for us, that's a micro school. We call it micro school. I know that term has kind of been used for different things, but for us, that means fewer than 10 kids and at a minimum 5. So kind of that 5 to 10, similar in age. And we can do that anywhere in a back, conference room at an office or an art studio that's not being used that day, a tutoring center, but a lot of them are in homes too, right? And we don't actually care as long as we have a place for these kids to sit and be comfortable and a Wi-Fi connection, because we're using the content that exists in the world as opposed to relying on that teacher figure as the deliverer of information.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Wow. I think empower learners, that is one of the shortest mission statements I've heard, but it gets you thinking. It does make you wonder, right? How people can bring up so much energy and motivation to be the world best, I don't know, Fortnite player or whatever. But why is it so hard to kind of translate that to math or history or English?
I saw it firsthand. It was interesting because I was running these computer programming classes, like after school workshops, and I had kind of landed on, just letting the kids build projects mostly. Like I was helping them. I was there as a coach, but I did very little. In fact, the first like couple sessions I had a lecture, but then after that I just canceled it because I turned into the Charlie Brown teacher, that's like wah 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 wah. No one's listening. So I just was like, okay, well, build a project, and here's a prompt if you need it, or just build whatever you want. I met this kid that was constantly complaining about how he hates school. Math is stupid. I hate math. I don't want to. And one day I caught him researching trigonometry. Kid's like 9 or 10 years old. It was like he was making a pirate ship video game that was shooting cannons, and to get the angle, like the ball to fly correctly, it was like sine and cosine. And of course, he was getting help from Google and other things. But I'm looking at this going, this is 7 times harder at least than anything his teachers ask him to do. And yet he like resists all of that and feels like that's too hard and whatever. And here he is on his own deciding to learn something that's difficult, right? And succeeding at it. I mean, it was really like one of those, just you step back and say, whoa, like we don't understand anything, and that's a lot of those moments for me have sort of led me here.
So you talked a lot about how how students have the motivation to do things and learn things on their own if they're solving something. What would you say in one sentence or less, what kind of alumni do you want to produce with Prenda?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for me, it goes back to the 2 words of empowered learners, right? Like I want people who see themselves that way, who want to be a learner and who know how to do it. And that's going to show up, really anywhere, right? If somebody's trying to figure out a database and they need to go search Google for how to write SQL queries, or they're trying to fix their washing machine. The other day, I came home and she had taken apart our washing machine. She, with the help of YouTube, she had the confidence to like do this. And you think that this is totally new given the internet, right? Because we now have all information like for freely available for anyone. And the question is not about the information anymore. It's about how do you get it and use it in a way that can help you and empower you in your life. So I want to see alumni who are empowered learners. I know that sounds trite, but I'm dead serious about it.
No, I find it so interesting because when I talk to colleagues or friends of mine who code or are software engineers, they basically tell me that it's not about coding, right? It's about critical thinking, packaging problems, larger problems into smaller ones and tackling them one by one. So, and I think that is exactly where your school is. What your school is trying to teach, right? Critical thinking and empowering people to solve problems instead of knowing the solution in the back of their head.
Yeah, one funny metric on this is to look at how many times per day a good software engineer visits like Stack Overflow or something. Like, it's not about like having the syntax all in your mind. That's actually minimally helpful. I mean, there's things that's like, okay, it'd be good to. But the real thing is thinking it and architecturing it, which is why I would rather give a smart developer in a project in a totally new language to her or him, and then I would give it to an expert in that language that I don't trust to be this type of learner and thinker, right? So I mean, you can see it gets into these whole conversations we have in Silicon Valley about what does a 10x engineer even mean, and it feels, it's like complicated, but the power of somebody who can just figure stuff out. And speaking of, going on and on about our mission and values, one of our core values is Prenda, figure it out. We say that to the kids, but we also say it to the guides that work with us. We say it to ourselves, our core team is like, let's just try. Like, let's just go take that responsibility to figure something out.
Mm-hmm. So let's kind of go back to the concept of micro schools. So I think the mission of creating empowering learners, I think you must redefine, when you're redefining the role of student, you probably also have to redefine the role of the teacher. The teacher is incredibly important in your schools. So how do you think about teachers in your concept? And I know that you don't call them teachers.
That's right. We definitely don't want to. It's very easy, especially for someone who's done it before and who has the answers, to slip into a mode of transmitting answers. We found that that's not helpful for empowering a learner, right? And I think everybody would agree, as you start to think about it, it's like, no, that doesn't give the child or the learner the opportunity to struggle through. I know this is probably going long, but I have a quick story I can tell from my coding days that kind of illustrates this point. I, like everyone, thought that to run a code club, you need to know how to code. And so I ran my code club, and then I helped some neighboring cities get code clubs in their libraries, so Scottsdale and Phoenix. And I called friends that were software developers professionally, and I had them go in and run the code club. You just need to show up at 3 p.m. and kids will be there, and you kind of help them with stuff. I had one code club that was on the clear other end of town, and nobody wanted to go. There was no developers that I knew over there, and I couldn't convince anybody to drive like 45 minutes to go visit this code club. And so I kept telling the librarians, who were both these sweet women in their 60s, who self-proclaimed like know nothing about computers. And I kept telling them, like, I'm really sorry, I'm trying to find you somebody, but if you want, you can just like do it yourself, and I'll kind of tell you what I do, which isn't heavily, content driven anyway, because by that point I had given up lectures and I had built this process that's really about like helping the kids. First you have to try it on your own, and then you have to go talk to another kid about it. So before they're even allowed to talk to an adult, there's these steps. And so I kind of explained all that to these two women, really meant as a temporary solution. And I'm still going around trying to, beg my friends to go out there and be the quote expert. And as this is happening, I watched the code clubs where my friends were, software developers were in the room. The engagement level and the attendance slowly dropped off. Like, I got the data, I could see it. And this one code club where these two women didn't know anything about computers, it started to just take off. Like, more and more kids were coming in. And so it was this like really striking thing for me. I had to go back and say, well, what is going on? How is this even happening? And one of, the things I realized is that when I would go watch these women interact with the kids, there was like no question that they were vested and committed, to these children, right? It was like, I have your back. I don't know anything about this. So the first thing they had was just a deep care. And the second thing they had, by necessity, was this humility and a modeled mindset of a learner, because they had the kids teaching them the things that they were learning. And so watching all of that, it was like, oh, like this is working, right? Like, kids were coming. Not only were they wanting to be there and choosing to learn, the engagement level was high, but they were really learning things. Like, I would sit down and watch them, and they were coming again and again and figuring stuff out and happy to show it to their, facilitator guides. And I started to say, oh, interesting. Meanwhile, the clubs with the experts, it was just kind of another class after school, and it became boring for people, and they didn't go. So it definitely shaped my vision about an adult, right? An adult in a classroom is critical. It's really, really important, and you live and die by the quality of instruction. I mean, there's good data on this. The quality of the teacher specifically is critical, but it's funny, you look at like a Raj Chetty paper or something, the last paragraph is sort of like, well, it's clear that there's some teachers that are a lot better than other teachers, but we don't really know why, right? And that's frustrating. It's my theory is it's much more about connecting with the children and helping empower them as learners, right? Which, you think back to your own experience in school, at least for me, the one teacher that really moved the needle for me, I have no idea what her, academic credentials were. Shout out to Miss Pugh if you're listening, but she cared a lot about me. Like, I have no idea if she was a good academic instructor, or she had good pedagogy or anything, right? Like, maybe not, but she definitely set me on a path to care about learning, at least at that point in my life. And I was really grateful for that, right? So I think that's one of our core values as well. We've written down as start with heart, and it means if you don't have that initial care, the rest of it is almost pointless.
So I think everyone can relate to what you just said, and as you were talking, I also look back at the teachers that had the biggest impact on me, and it's hard to put my finger on it, right? What they had that motivated me. But let's flip the question. So I think, well, you're now in a position where you have to identify this kind of talent, right? And you said you have a code and things that you kind of guidelines that you set out. But how do you identify people that might make good guides and teachers?
So yeah, we've struggled a lot with this, right? Because there's children at stake, and we definitely don't want to take any risks, right? So that's the danger of innovating in education. At the same time, we have no idea. Nobody does what really makes a great, guide in our system and what doesn't. So to be completely, transparent about that. So what we've tried to do is build in what we know has to be true, which is the children have to be physically, emotionally safe, right? So we've put in a series of background checks and verification, fingerprint card, and we took what the school districts do for safety of students, and then we actually escalated that because we're in smaller groups and we're in homes, and there's things about what we're doing that you just want to be extra careful. So that's kind of step one. Let's make sure that people aren't getting hurt, and then we've taken a step to talk to them beforehand and kind of really assess where they're at ideologically, but that's, as you know, very, very difficult. There's the famous story about Google. I think you work for Google, is that
That's
right,
true,
Alex?
yeah.
I don't know if you're allowed to say that on your podcast. There's a famous story about Google where they initially were asking all these mind bender questions and looking at your college GPA and even your high school GPA. Maybe there were all these crazy things, and then somebody went through and did the analysis on it, and it actually had no correlation. It was, it was like, oh well, why are we asking these questions? And I think that's kind of where I'm at too. Is we know a good guide through the engagement levels that we see and the results that we see in the kids. But our goal is to allow lots of different people, as long as that starting point of safety is in place. We want to allow many different, types of options for these guides, and then over time we'll see what works.
Fascinating, because if you see your startup as a kind of a product, then basically I think teachers and the concept that is, in my understanding, a big part of the product itself. But let's talk about the customers, if we want to stay in that image. I was wondering, this sounds new, this sounds intriguing and interesting. I don't know. I could see that it might be hard, or it might be a challenge to talk to parents and have them test or beta test the concept of your micro school, right? Just because it's new, people don't know it. They had themselves had a traditional school career, so to speak. So how do you convince parents to try the new way of teaching?
It's a great question. So initially, I thought two things. I thought one, we'll get a very low in the early days of as we work up the adoption curve, we'll get a very low percentage of the people we talk to. So I thought maybe one out of every 100 or 200 parents we talk to would be interested in doing this. And the second thing I thought was that they would almost all be homeschoolers. They would be people who have already kind of taken that leap. So now we have some data. We're just crossing 300 students and trying hard to get to 400 here as we start a new school year. growing very fast. We're finding two things that are really interesting. One is even in our early days, the number is way higher. It's maybe like 20% of the people we talk to are like ready to sign up, and that's really a surprise for me. Like I said, I expected it to be low because you described it, right? This is a new model, and so that to me, I'm interpreting it as indication that that the understanding is actually much deeper, that the old way of doing education is not working. I think it's just people haven't had an option that they considered a viable option before. And homeschooling maybe was the closest thing to it. So that's why I thought homeschooling was going to be responsible for most of our kids. I just did the analysis. It's slightly under half of our kids right now came from homeschooling. So that's way lower than I thought it would be in the early days. And we see that number continuing to go down as more and more of the new people that are coming in are actually coming in through other people. Now, one thing that's important to call out here, just to sort of mitigate some of this risk. So one is we're speaking a language and we're resonating with parents in a way that people haven't done, and so I mean, just like in the beginning of this podcast, you're talking about teaching, like the classroom looking the same as it did in 1850 feels like outdated. It's almost like tired to say that, and yet everybody knows it. I think the thing that we're recognizing is that actually is deep in parents, lots of parents, and they haven't known what to do. They haven't had in their hand another choice. Even the charter schools often are the same model. Maybe they add Latin or something, or they wear uniforms, or everybody does dual immersion in Chinese. But like those are tweaks in the content. That's not anything about the model. So yeah, so I guess that's kind of point number one about it. And point number two is they're not just believing in our message and in our picture and vision of what school can be. They're also believing in someone they know. And the way our micro schools are forming is very organic. And so someone will step up in a community, often a parent, and will say, I would love to run one of these Prenda micro schools. And they have already trust and connections built into their life. And so what we see is people saying, well, this model sounds interesting, but I definitely trust so and so with my child. And that is pulling a lot of this early growth as well, where maybe people wouldn't have just gone online and is empowering not just the kids, it's empowering the parents to be involved in a way that they haven't been in the past, without overwhelming them with, like, you have to do everything on your own as a homeschooler.
And I can imagine that convincing people to try Prenda gets increasingly easier as you acquire, or not acquire, but as more students sign up to your schools. It must have been probably
Sure.
how was it like in the early days of Prenda? That probably was the moment where you had the most resistance or the most convincing to do.
Yeah, we've been very careful actually, because this is people's children and this is a very sensitive topic. I tell my team that's recruiting to never convince people. So we really are careful about that. It's like, let's tell them what we're doing, and if they want to do it, we invite them in. But it's not. I definitely don't want to get in this world of convincing, just because you're going to have this reservation in your mind the whole time, and without committing to it, it's going to be tough. So that being a caveat, the first micro school that I put together was 7 kids in my house. It was people that I knew, the parents, and I didn't have anything built. So I had a philosophy, but no product. And so it definitely wasn't them buying the product, but they knew me. And it was like, they knew me and they knew the problems that their kids had experienced in a traditional school setting. And so they said, I That's true. And hopefully that was true. The net promoter score at the end of that, semester was 100%. And not only did they say they would recommend it, they actually did. 100% referral rate. Like, they all told at least one friend about Prenda, and so there was some good signs that that actually came true. So while I was doing that class, I was also building the initial MVP for Prenda.
I love it that you the metric for success is the net promoter score. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
That's for the digital age.
it's a silly metric to use for such a small sample.
So maybe can you walk us through the business model of Prenda?
Absolutely. So we to the state. Okay, so one, we have multiple business models, and that's important to say. So we can operate as a fully private school. In that case, parents come together, they pay tuition. Imagine 10 parents of 10 children paying $10,000 each, and so you have $100,000. We have a fee that we charge for our piece of it, typically like $30K, and so then that additional $70,000 would be to pay a guide. And I don't know if you know the data on teacher pay, but in most parts of the United States, that's plenty of money to go find any teacher that you've ever met. That's amazing if you want to hire them away from a traditional education setting. But oftentimes it's find somebody that does a theater group that's amazing for your children at in the after school hours. But this is a way for them to also make some part-time money and potentially good money, right? To run this school of 10 children, during the daytime hours. So, finding that and putting that all together, again, it's interesting. We're empowering people to kind of organize in a way that no one's really invited them to do before. And so I get real excited to see the creativity that comes together. So that's kind of one example of that. In Arizona, we have worked with partners. So we have, for example, a school within a school inside of a public school. So these 10 kids are officially enrolled through the school district, and they go to that elementary school for PE and music and recess and things. But then they run the Prenda class with a non-credentialed, basically like instructor level position that's able to really play the guide role and do a really good job. So that's a different example. And then we have kids that are signed up through charter partners to the, those look like online students. So they're basically remote learners, but they meet together in person. And we have partnerships then with the charter school that's able to help fund the school and pay the guides.
When did you actually start? When was the first class? When was that initiated?
That group of 7 kids in my dining room table was January of 2018. So
2018. So a bit over, and you already have 300 to 400 students enrolled already.
We had 7 for that whole year, right? For that whole semester while I built the MVP. Over the summer, I convinced a couple of my friends to also do it. So I think we had 3 or 4 classes, something like 30 kids. And that was true up until about January. And at that point, we had built something that seemed reliable enough to actually start spreading the word. And meanwhile, the word of mouth was starting to happen. And so as that all took place, very quickly through January, if you look for these like hockey stick exponential growth, but since January, it's now almost August, we've had an average monthly growth of maybe 35-40% per month. And so that's part of where that growth has come from, and really accelerating here as we get ready for parents that have been out of town and not thinking about this over the summer are like, okay, I got to get this official and get everything squared away for this school year that's about to start. So we're hoping for 400.
Got it. So I have to say that I'm pretty sure running Prenda or a school is probably a lot different than running a standard startup. And you mentioned that you already ran, let's say, a more traditional startup in a way. So what is the thing that you think about when you wake up? What is the key operational challenges that keep you up?
It depends on the day. I describe it as waves. There was a moment where, like you were asking earlier in this conversation, where I thought, oh, parents are never going to go for this. Like no one's going to be interested. And just over time, saw that plenty of evidence that they actually are there's a strong market demand for this. And then it was strong enough that everything felt like it was falling apart. And we were trying to deal with all the regulatory aspects of enrolling kids and funding and all the different, there's rules and laws around special ed and all these different things that you have to deal with. So having to quickly solve all of these problems and work with the right partners and hire the right people, I felt like Han Solo flying the Millennium Falcon going like, come on, babies, stay together, like it was like one of those kind of moments. That's a very nerdy reference. I'm sorry.
No, that's totally
Um,
fine.
and then, yeah, and then it was, okay, like, I think we've got that squared away. Like, how fast can this grow, and how exactly are people going to hear about Prenda and make a decision to come? And we've spent this summer really like honing that part of the funnel and thinking about things. We're doing the Y Combinator program, which is very traditional startup, and so it's been interesting to kind of apply lessons from the startup world, but to do it in something so mission driven. And obviously the difference here is that we're talking about kids, and we're talking about education, and we're talking about changing lives forever. And so for me, those startup type issues are only useful in as much as they help the core mission. And again, that's two words: empower learners. So I've got to empower as many learners as I possibly can, and that's I'm not joking when I say we want to reach millions of kids. And so that trajectory will look like actually even more interesting than, I mean, if that happens, we would be by far the largest, most successful Y Combinator company. And that includes a very strong roster of companies, I'm sure you're aware. So that all comes with it. But for me, it's all means to an end of being able to do the right thing for a lot of kids.
So that's actually an angle I'm really interested in, because you're now in the Y Combinator list. You're taking some of the startup instruments and things that startups do and apply to the educational world. But it doesn't seem like the typical Silicon Valley model of getting seed money, blowing up the top line, selling through as fast as you can. You even said, we're not trying to push Prenda into the market. We're not trying to sell it aggressively. We're trying to convince people. Maybe how does that? Where are the friction points here? How do you make it work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of variance in that, quote, typical Silicon Valley model. One of our mentors, Y Combinator partner named Tim Brady, was the #3 employee at Yahoo. And it's actually very interesting to talk to him about his story of basically the first like real website. I mean, there were other things, but Yahoo was so pulled. So they never had to sell, right? It was just like they were just responding for years and years, and they grew at an astronomical pace. They have this term called product market fit in startups, and basically what that it's one of these annoying definitions. It's like you know it when you feel it. Like for me, you say what's keeping you up right now. It's not like can we get more users, get more students, get more money. It's like how can we serve these people that want to do this and reach as many of them as we can? And we're getting these messages from other states, and we're saying, okay, we're not in that state, but like how can we open that market sooner? Yeah, so I think you actually can apply a lot of it. We definitely have no intention of selling the business or doing anything like that. Like I said, this isn't about money, and the goal here is to reach as many kids as possible. What's really insightful about the Silicon Valley approach, and it took me a while to be convinced of this, but is this idea. Reid Hoffman has a book called Blitzscaling, where he's basically arguing for growing faster than feels responsible. And I was like, yeah, why would I do that? That doesn't feel responsible. But over time, it was pointed out to me by people that I know and trust and that really understand our model, is that taking on more students and adding more guides and doing all these things at a pace that's fast, one, it brings our influence to more people, which is great, but also like it forces us into this very high learning mode. And here's another of our core values. Man, I'm getting them all in. Hopefully I can get the other two. We only have 5, and this will be 3 that I've mentioned today. We write it as like learning with a greater than sign and comfort, but we just say learning over comfort. And you really always have a choice, whether you're a student in 3rd grade or you're running a venture-backed company, you have this decision, like, do you want to be comfortable or do you want to learn? And when we think of it that way, it's like we're gonna go hard as people want. We're finding that doesn't seem to be the bottleneck or the limitation. So the question is like, how can we say yes to as many of these students that want to come in, and in the process, be accountable to them, build the thing that's better, and trust that by taking on more and moving in a mode that's blitz scaling, like is actually going to be the best thing for all of these students and their parents and their families. So that's how we're looking at it. So it does maybe look more like a Silicon Valley startup than maybe you're assuming, but I think it's for different reasons than what most people would assume.
I love that kind of thinking about it, because I'm talking to a lot of founders from different areas, and it's basically there's this standard approach, right? How can we get seed money? How can we push it in the market? But I love that you take the best bits out of it, but stay true to your mission of empowering learners and doing good for the communities and the kids themselves. So I'm still wondering, do you think that Prenda models is it the best model for every student out there? So, or another way to ask it, if you had the power to completely restructure the education system in the US, which path would a student take and which role would Prenda play?
Yeah, so I think you'd have to be full of hubris to say my solution is the best for everyone. I'm never going to be that person. What we have found is that there's a lot of cases that I was maybe a little nervous about where what we're doing actually helps a lot, and specifically take someone with a learning disability. People ask me about that from the very beginning, like, how are you going to do this? There's all these, rules and things you have to do. Interestingly, many of the first line of defense that professional educators deliver to a student with learning challenges is to take away some of the structures that we've taken away for everyone, right? So we give them more choices and we give them more time and allow them to kind of work at their own pace, much more one-on-one attention. These are built into our model for every single student. And so places like that, I would say there's a lot of students, and I'm serious about millions. There's 50 million students in the United States. So I guess I'm not telling you it's everyone, but I think there's more than you might think. And yeah, for me, what this does is it reorganizes some of the components, right? You have these dedicated, passionate adults who care about educating children. Those people, many of them work inside of the traditional education system. So many of them don't right now. And I feel like I want to take those people and empower them to not only deliver our core model, but to make it better and learn and grow and progress. So there's that piece of it. There's all these students that I think as you get more scale, you're going to see Prenda micro schools that each one looks different. And you can have one that's teaching kids Japanese, and you can have one that focuses on founding fathers, and you can have crazy stuff, right? You you could have a knitting one, and you could have a Jane Austen dedicated micro school. Of it, like obviously everybody has to do math and English and reading and science and social studies, like our core academics. But there's tons of room to customize on top of that, and I would love to see a world where there's lots and lots of choices, not just in the the place where you meet and the person that's guiding and the content, but everything, right?
So let's kind of shift gears. As you know, I'm originally from Germany, living in San Francisco now for a bit. But I always like to confront my interview guests with some of the things that are being kind of the policies that are being introduced in Germany, or the lines of thinking. I want to talk with you about two of the policies that are being discussed now, and just would like your take on it. The first one is called Digitalpakt, which basically means that the state of Germany is funneling tons of money into schools to allow them to set up a modern digital infrastructure like tablets or smart boards, and trying to use digital methods of teaching, right? But I would say are fairly still using the traditional contents that is still on the agenda. So what do you think about that?
So I was on a committee, a industry advisory committee for the local school district where I live, and it was a very similar thing. They raised a bond. They went to the voters, and they got tens of millions of. I don't know the exact number. It was definitely more than $10 million for our school district to buy computers and to have every kid 7th grade and above has a dedicated, one-to-one computer, and carts full of computers for all the other ones. And there was all this talk about which computers, and then investing in the Wi-Fi infrastructure, all this interesting stuff. I'm on meetings and I would sit there and listen, like, okay, which Wi-Fi are you doing? Which projector did you choose? And why did you choose that one? And all these things. And one day I raised my hand and I said, how is all this going to be used? And they looked at me like it was a weird conversation because the look was kind of like, oh, well, we hadn't really thought of that, and it's up to the teachers was the official answer. I was like, I mean, I think I like fell to the floor at that moment because it's like a tool without a use is just going to sit on a shelf, or it's going to be a really expensive textbook. So yeah, I mean, our model wouldn't be possible without computers, but we've like built it around computers and an internet connection in a way that's very different. I don't think you just throw the money at and the devices at teachers and schools and just hope things get better. I think there's this famous debacle in the US in Los Angeles where there was, I mean, it was like corrupt too, but basically a whole bunch of iPads in Los Angeles and lots of money, and people I think went to jail. I mean, it was a disaster, but it was one of these similar things where lots and lots of money, lots and lots of technology, no real needle moving at all, and that feels frustrating.
Okay, the second thing that is being discussed in Germany is Inklusion, which you might guess means inclusion. And it basically describes the concept of having students of all levels of ability learn together instead of having them in separate classes.
Yep, we love it. I mean, everything's personalized. We ask the kids to go to another student before coming to the adult, and that's systematically in our model. So it gives what's really interesting about this people don't see is it's not one dimensional. There's lots of different kinds of intelligence and there's lots of different skills, and so it's different kids, different days, right? Like, so if it was like always one kid asking the same other kid for help on everything, I think that could be kind of demoralizing or annoying. But what's amazing to watch is the kid who needs a lot of help on his writing and goes and gets help from someone else. That someone else may come later when they're building robots and ask the kid who was struggling on writing. And to see everyone kind of cultivating their natural abilities and interests, it can be just very, very empowering, right? Like everyone should walk away from school feeling empowered and feeling like not feeling like la di da di da, everything like I'm a champion for doing nothing, but feeling like, I put work into that and I learned it and I was able to help someone else learn, and that's a really great feeling.
Well, Kelly, I can just tell you, I really feel the passion and the enthusiasm that you have for this topic coming from I guess a very impressive CV that you yourself have, and just describe or kind of dedicating your time and energy now to something that you feel so passionate about. It's been a really interesting discussion. And before I let you go, I want to ask you something that I ask all my interview partners is what is the best advice that you've ever received in your life?
Well, it's funny you bring up my CV. I mean, basically the advice specifically was don't go to meetings. And I bought into this idea in corporate America that there was a certain way you have to behave and pretend like to be professional and all of these things. And people were filling their calendars with just meeting after meeting after meeting. And someone was just like, well, why do you have to go? Like, what would happen if you just didn't go? And I just stopped going unless I like had something to contribute or something, it sounds so simple, but I would extrapolate that to, kind of a more abstract level, which is don't buy into the stuff just because it's convention. There's really no reason. I joke about having a master's degree from MIT. It will get me an initial conversation with people, but honestly, it's not the reason people choose to work with me or choose to like me after. Like, if I'm not working on something interesting, if I'm not a good person that is vested in them and helping them with their goals, it really is like nothing, right? And so I think too many people put this stake in these artificial structures, and that you could look at a high school transcript or a college degree and have a whole conversation about this. I'm not against all of those things, but I think the important thing is to have more confidence in who we really are as people and who I really am as a person. And it's been fun to kind of gradually discover that over the course of my life.
So Kelly, you say don't go to meetings, but I can say thank you for coming to this interview. This has been a really refreshing, a really new take on education. So thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
So, hier ist wieder Alex. Mir hat das Gespräch sehr gefallen, insbesondere als wir darüber gesprochen haben, wie man die Methoden der Startup-Skalierung auf etwas so Untypisches wie Prendas Microschool-Konzept anwenden kann. Hier sind die 3 Dinge, die ich aus dem Gespräch gelernt habe. Erstens, die Power eines starken Mission Statements. Kelly hat ein ganz einfaches Mission Statement: Empower Learners. 2 Worte, die aber alles sagen, was er erreichen will. Daraus zieht er seine direkten Ziele und auch die zentralen Werte seines Konzepts. Ich glaube, dass klare Ziele ein häufig vernachlässigter Teil der ganzen Businesswelt sind, denn Ziele helfen enorm dabei zu sagen, welche Wege man verfolgt und vor allem, warum man die verfolgt. Ich liebe das Sprichwort: Wenn du nicht weißt, zu welchem Hafen du segelst, dann ist kein Wind günstig. Und genau deshalb sind klare Mission Statements wie das von Kelly so wichtig. Zweitens, Leadership heißt nicht, die meiste Expertise zu haben oder der Schlauste zu sein, sondern meistens ist es die Fähigkeit, Psychological Safety zu schaffen, in der jeder sich ausprobieren kann. Google hat vor einiger Zeit mal untersucht, was Teams eigentlich erfolgreich macht. Und die Antwort hat nichts zu tun mit der Anzahl an Doktortiteln im Team oder den Jahren, die die einzelnen Leute in ihrem Job schon verbracht haben, sondern es war einfach die Fähigkeit, als Gruppe zusammenzuarbeiten, unterschiedliche Perspektiven zu wertschätzen und ein Umfeld zu schaffen, in dem jeder Lust hatte und auch die Fähigkeit hatte, seine eigenen Ideen einzubringen. Drittens, Tools, um Startups zu skalieren, können auch in anderen Bereichen erfolgreich sein, man sollte sie aber smart einsetzen. Die meisten Silicon Valley Startups konzentrieren sich meist auf eine Sache: Wachstum. Das heißt, wie können wir so schnell wie möglich Nutzer gewinnen, in neue Märkte expandieren und schneller sein als die Wettbewerber. Wenn man über sowas spricht wie Bildung, dann sind aber plötzlich ganz andere Sachen gefragt. Zum Beispiel, wie kann ich das Vertrauen schaffen, dass ein Elternteil mir die Bildung ihres Kindes anvertraut? Kelly lehnt daher ein paar Weisheiten des Silicon Valley ab. Zum Beispiel verzichtet er auf allzu aggressive Sales-Taktiken, aber ein paar nutzt er sehr wohl. Insbesondere etwas schneller zu sein, als er eigentlich noch komfortabel wäre, zwingt ihn selbst in eine demütige Rolle als Lernender, die er ja mit seinem Startup an seine Schüler vermitteln will. So, das war's für heute. Wenn dir mein Podcast gefällt, dann schreib mir unbedingt einen Review auf Apple Podcasts. Ich möchte mehr Menschen in Deutschland mit diesen Gründergeschichten erreichen und deine Bewertung hilft mir sehr. Alle weiteren Infos und meinen Newsletter findest du auf digitaleoptimisten.de. Bis zum nächsten Mal.